The wilderness is not a waste. Why God led people into the desert according to the Bible. There are seasons in life that make no sense while you're standing in the middle of them. You look around and everything feels unfamiliar, stripped down, quieter than usual. You're not where you used to be, but you're not where you thought you'd be either. It's like walking through dry land where nothing seems to grow, and everything in you wants to run back to something more comfortable, more certain, more safe. But somehow every door behind you is sealed shut, and the road ahead disappears into silence. That's the wilderness. We don't like to talk about this part of the journey. It's not the part people share on social media. It's not the place we celebrate in church testimonies. It's the place we tend to skip over in our own stories, the months or years where we felt forgotten, overlooked, or like maybe we missed something God was trying to show us. But the truth is, the wilderness isn't the gap between where you were and where you're going. It's the ground God uses to get you ready. When we open the Bible, we see this pattern again and again. The wilderness isn't a footnote in the story of God's people. It's the shaping ground. The Israelites didn't wander for no reason. Jesus wasn't tempted in the desert for drama. Elijah, Moses, David, even Paul, they all had to pass through a wilderness before walking fully in what God called them to do. And that wasn't punishment. It wasn't a sign they'd failed. It was something holy, something necessary. You might be there now. No loud miracles, no clear signs, no breakthrough in sight. Just quiet. Just the daily question, God, what are you doing with me out here? But here's the thing I want you to know before we dive into this. The wilderness isn't where God loses you. It's where He meets you. Not as the God of flashy deliverance, but as the God of slow transformation. As the one who teaches you to trust Him, not because of what He gives, but because of who He is when there's nothing else to lean on. So before you start wishing this season away, before you try to shortcut your way out of it, pause. Look around. Because the desert might just be the most sacred place you've ever been. Let's talk about why. One of the most uncomfortable truths in Scripture is that sometimes God leads His people into places they would never choose for themselves. Not by accident. Not because they took a wrong turn, but because He planned it that way from the very beginning. When God delivered the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, there was a shorter route to the Promised Land. A faster one. A more logical one. But Exodus 13:17-18 says, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. So God led the people around by the desert road toward the Red Sea. That wasn't random. That wasn't plan B. That was the design, and that's something we have to confront in our own walk with God. Because we assume that if we're going the long way, if it's harder than expected, if it feels like we're circling through barren land, then something must be wrong. That we missed the mark. That we didn't hear God clearly. But sometimes the longer way is the safer way. Sometimes the wilderness is the only path that will prepare your heart to hold the promise. God knew what was waiting on the other route. He knew the Israelites weren't ready for battle yet, even if they were free. He knew what kind of training their hearts needed. And so in His mercy He led them into the desert, not to abandon them, but to develop them. And that same mercy is still working today. If you're in a season that feels delayed, off course, or painfully prolonged, let this anchor you. You are not off track just because you're not moving fast. You are not lost just because you're in a dry place. Sometimes God isn't rushing you to the destination because He's busy rooting out the things that would destroy you once you get there. The wilderness is not a holding pattern. It's not God hitting pause. It's the very path He chose for you to walk because He loves you too much to let you arrive unready. So no, the wilderness is not a detour. It's not punishment. It's not the scenic route. It's the design, the slow, intentional, divine design of a God who knows what you're being prepared for, even when you don't. Getting out of Egypt was only the beginning. God brought His people out in a single night, with signs, wonders, and a parting sea. But getting Egypt out of them? That took 40 years. This is where the wilderness gets personal. Because for most of us, we think freedom means we've left the place that hurt us. But God knows that real freedom doesn't happen until the place that hurt us leaves us. The Israelites had lived in slavery for over 400 years. Generation after generation raised under the shadow of chains, beatings, and forced labor. Egypt wasn't just a location, it was a mindset. It was an identity. And you don't shake that off overnight. You can leave the abusive relationship. You can walk away from the toxic job. You can cut off the addiction. But if you're still living by fear, still waiting for the other shoe to drop, still thinking like a captive, then Egypt is still in you. That's what the desert was for. In the wilderness, there were no Egyptian taskmasters, but the people still grumbled like they were oppressed. They still panicked when water ran low, still accused Moses of leading them to die, still longed for the predictability of slavery over the uncertainty of freedom. That's not just nostalgia. That's the residue of captivity. God knew this. He knew they couldn't enter the land of promise with slave hearts. He knew they couldn't rule as sons and daughters if they still thought like servants. So he led them into a place where he could strip all that off, where there were no structures to lean on, no routines to fall into, no idols to hide behind. Just him, just his voice, just daily manna, one step at a time. The same goes for you. You may be in a place right now where you feel like God is removing everything, your comfort, your control, even your identity. But what if he's not trying to harm you? What if he's trying to heal you? What if he's unearthing the lies Egypt planted in you so that he can replace them with truth? God is not content to just rescue you from your old life. He wants to reshape you, rewire how you see him, how you see yourself, and how you live. That can't happen when you're rushing ahead. That only happens in the quiet places, in the barren places, in the wilderness. It may feel like loss. It may feel like you're being stripped of everything. But what's actually happening is far more beautiful. God is removing Egypt from your heart, so you can enter your promise whole and healed. There's a shift that happens in the wilderness, one that feels quiet at first, almost imperceptible. But over time, it changes everything. It's the moment when you stop following God for what he does and start walking with him because of who he is. You see, back in Egypt, the Israelites knew God as the God who delivers, the one who sent plagues, split seas, and broke chains. They saw him in lightning and power. And that kind of God is easy to follow when you're desperate for rescue. But once you're out of danger, once the miracles slow down and the mountaintop moments are gone, that's where real relationship begins or ends. And so in the wilderness, God introduced himself differently. No more thunder, no more spectacle. Instead, daily manna, a quiet cloud by day, a gentle fire by night, water from a rock, steady, unremarkable, but faithful. He wasn't trying to impress them anymore. He was trying to teach them, to show them that he's not just the God of dramatic rescues. He's the God of daily provision. And that's a lesson most of us don't learn until we're forced to, when the blessings dry up, when the big answers don't come, when the prayers feel like they're bouncing off the sky. That's where we either walk away or dig deeper. Because here's the truth most of us don't want to admit. A lot of us fell in love with the way God showed up, not with him. We loved the doors he opened, the peace he gave, the people he brought. But when those things disappear, so often, so does our trust. That's why the wilderness matters. It's where God slowly, patiently teaches you that he's not just useful. He's holy. That he's not just the answer to your need. He is the need. That knowing him, even without the miracles, is still more than enough. That's what Job discovered. After all the loss, after all the silence, after all the questions that went unanswered, he said, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." Job 42:5. That's what the wilderness does. It takes you from hearing about God to seeing him, from depending on what he does to resting in who he is. If you're in that place right now, don't mistake God's quietness for absence. Don't assume the lack of miracles means a lack of movement. Sometimes the greatest work he's doing is the one no one else sees, the work he's doing in you. Because once you know God like that, intimately, quietly, without props or prizes. You're unshakable. And that kind of faith, that's what the promised land requires. If there's one thing the wilderness will press into you, it's this. Trust doesn't always come with details, and obedience doesn't always come with explanations. Imagine waking up every single day and not knowing what tomorrow holds. Not having a storage closet full of food, not knowing if the cloud would move or if you'd be stuck in the same place another week. That was the Israelites' reality. Manna came that day, water came that moment, and the cloud, it was the only GPS they had. Numbers 9:17-23 tells us that whether the cloud moved for a day, a month, or a year, the people stayed or moved based entirely on that sign. No schedule, no warning, no pattern, just follow it. That's it. And to be honest, that's hard. We love strategy. We love knowing the plan. We want God to lay it out in bullet points. This month, I'll heal you. Next month, I'll promote you. By June, you'll be married. By September, you'll be free. But the wilderness doesn't come with calendars. It comes with trust. And that's the point. You don't learn obedience when things make sense. You learn obedience when they don't. When God says wait and nothing seems to be happening. When He says go and it looks like a dead end. When He says forgive and they don't deserve it. That's where the roots of your faith grow deep, not in understanding, but in surrender. Think about Abraham. God told him to sacrifice Isaac without explaining why. Think about Noah. He built a boat with no rain in sight. Think about Mary. She said yes to carrying the Messiah with no idea how Joseph or the world would respond. Every great move of God begins with someone obeying in the dark, and in your own life, that's probably what the wilderness looks like. God's asking for your yes, your full, fearless, no conditions yes, not because it makes sense, but because He's God, because He's good, because He sees the whole picture. Let's be honest, it's humbling. It breaks our pride. It exposes our control issues. But it also strengthens something holy inside of us. A deeper faith, a quieter courage, a trust that isn't circumstantial, but rooted. So if God is calling you to something right now and you don't understand it, move anyway. If He's asking you to stay, even though you feel stuck, stay anyway. The wilderness isn't just testing your patience, it's training your obedience. And the ones who learn to follow Him without needing all the answers, those are the ones who walk into the promise prepared to carry it well. Pride doesn't always show up the way we think it does. It's not just arrogance or loud self-promotion. Sometimes pride wears the mask of self-reliance. Sometimes it's the subtle belief that I've got this, or I know what I'm doing, or I can handle life on my terms. And if there's one thing the wilderness does with perfect precision, it exposes that illusion. God led the Israelites into the wilderness not just to test their faith, but to humble their hearts. Deuteronomy 8:2-3 says it plainly. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years, to humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Humility is not something that comes naturally to most of us. We like having a plan. We like feeling capable. But the wilderness removes those comforts. You don't get to be the expert there. You don't get to control the outcomes. And that's when the real work begins. Because when pride dies, something beautiful is born. Purpose. God wasn't just humbling the Israelites to make them feel small. He was emptying them of everything false so He could fill them with something eternal. He was shaping them into a people who could carry His presence, who could steward a land of promise, who could represent His heart to the world. But that kind of purpose can't grow in a proud heart. It grows in the soil of surrender. And it's not just the Israelites. Look at the people God used most powerfully in Scripture. Moses, who spent 40 years tending sheep before he led a nation. David, who was forgotten in the field before he was crowned king. Paul, who went into isolation in Arabia before he changed the world. Each one had to be emptied before they could be trusted. It's the same with you. You might feel like this season is breaking you down, but maybe it's breaking you open. Maybe the disappointments, the delays, the things you thought you'd achieve by now, they aren't failures. They're preparation. God's not trying to crush you. He's cultivating you. Your pride may not go quietly. It rarely does. It will fight for control, for recognition, for certainty. But once it dies, what awakens in its place is something sacred: clarity, compassion, dependence, destiny. The wilderness doesn't just remove your idols. It reveals your identity. And when you finally come face to face with your own weakness, you begin to walk in a strength that's not your own. That's where purpose lives, not in your plan, but in God's process. Let's be honest, waiting feels like wasting. And in the wilderness, the waiting can feel endless. Days blur into weeks. Weeks stretch into months. Sometimes years. And if we're not careful, we start to believe the lie that nothing is happening. That God must have forgotten. That He's holding out on us. That the promise is passing us by. But what if the delay isn't a punishment? What if it's development? When the Israelites left Egypt, it wasn't supposed to take 40 years to reach the Promised Land. The trip, geographically, could have been made in less than 2 weeks. But the goal wasn't just to move people from one place to another. The goal was to make them ready. They weren't just entering a land, they were stepping into an identity. From slaves to sons, from wanderers to warriors, from a rescued people to a covenant people. That kind of transformation doesn't happen quickly. It's not about reaching the destination fast. It's about becoming the kind of person who can live there when you arrive. We live in a culture that celebrates speed, fast results, quick wins. But God moves at the pace of transformation. And that pace is often slow on purpose. Think about it, even Jesus had a wilderness. Before He healed a single person, before He preached a single sermon, the Spirit led Him into the desert. Not the devil, the Spirit. For 40 days, He fasted, was tested, was alone. Why? Because the wilderness wasn't meant to delay His ministry. It was meant to define it. That's how God works. He develops in secret what He intends to use in public. You may feel overlooked right now, forgotten, like your calling is sitting on a shelf. But trust this: God does not forget what He anoints, and He never wastes a season. Every day you think nothing is happening is a day He's doing something in you, strengthening your character, deepening your roots, clarifying your vision. Because when the door opens, when the promise comes, you won't just be ready to step into it. You'll be ready to sustain it. Don't confuse delay with disqualification. God is not slow. He's precise. And everything you're walking through right now, the frustrations, the stretching, the waiting, it's not holding you back. It's holding you together. You are not behind. You are becoming. The wilderness never lasts forever. And even though it may feel like it's been your whole life, every season has an endpoint. Every desert has a boundary. Eventually, the cloud moves. The manna stops. The Jordan River opens. And one morning, after what felt like an eternity, you realize it's time to step out. But here's the truth no one prepares you for. You don't leave the wilderness the same person who entered it. You can't, because you've been changed, quietly, deeply, day by day. Not by noise, but by need. Not by ease, but by endurance. You've walked through things no one else saw. You've carried questions only God could hold. And in the process, your faith stopped being a concept and started becoming your lifeline. That's why God brings His people into the desert, not to wound them, but to rebuild them. Think of the Israelites. When they finally crossed the Jordan into the Promised Land, they weren't just a wandering crowd anymore. They were a nation, a people, a community with covenant, with history, with memory. The wilderness didn't weaken them. It refined them. What came out of the desert was stronger, more unified, more dependent on God than ever before. Or think about Jesus. After 40 days in the wilderness, He didn't come out broken. He came out ready to preach, ready to lead, ready to carry the weight of a mission that would change the world. The desert didn't diminish Him. It clarified His authority. It revealed the depth of His obedience. It prepared Him for What was next? You may not see it now, but the same is happening in you. One day you'll look back on this wilderness and realize it gave you things that comfort never could, endurance you didn't know you had, wisdom that only comes through walking with God in the dark, a kind of peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, and an identity that's no longer built on what you do, but who you are in Him. So when the wilderness ends, and it will end, don't rush past it. Don't forget it. Carry it with you. Not as a wound, but as a witness. Let it remind you every time you step into something new that God did not waste your pain. He used every dry season to grow something sacred in you, and that is something worth holding on to. We spend so much of our lives trying to get out of the wilderness that we forget to ask what God is trying to do in the wilderness. Maybe you clicked on this video feeling dry, discouraged, or even forgotten. Maybe you're in a season where you're asking questions with no answers. Or maybe you've been in this desert so long you've stopped believing anything will ever change. If that's you, I want to say this as clearly as I can. The wilderness is not the end of your story. It never was. In Scripture, the desert is rarely the destination. It's the threshold. It's the sacred ground between bondage and promise, between calling and commissioning, between knowing about God and truly walking with Him. And if He has you there right now, it's not because He's absent, it's because He's near. Near enough to undo what needs to be undone. Near enough to deal with the things that can't follow you into the next season. Near enough to teach you slowly and tenderly that even if everything else is stripped away, He remains. You don't have to fear the wilderness anymore. It's not punishment. It's not failure. It's not divine silence. It's divine strategy. The wilderness is where God writes the parts of your story that don't make sense until later. The kind of chapters that become someone else's survival guide one day. So walk slowly. Listen closely. Don't despise the desert. Because when the time comes to leave it, you won't just be free, you'll be formed. And that formation is the foundation for everything that's coming next. The wilderness is not a waste. It's holy ground. And if you're standing in it today, you are right where you need to be. Keep going. He's not done, and neither are you.